I remember the exact moment the cold stopped feeling like cold and started feeling like nothing at all. It was the night of December 24th, 2023, in Spokane, Washington. A night when the weather alert on my phone had been flashing for hours, warning everyone in the area to stay indoors as the snowstorm moved in. The wind sounded like it was clawing at the sides of the house, and the temperature had dropped so fast it felt unreal. 16 degrees Fahrenheit. I knew the number because it kept replaying in my mind even as the sting in my fingers faded into something far more dangerous. I was lying on the front porch of my mom's house, my cheek pressed against wood that burned with cold and snow blowing sideways across my hair and face. I tried lifting my hand to brush the snow away, but my arm barely moved. My glove had fallen off during the fall, or maybe during the moment she shoved me out, and all I could see now was a pale, shaking hand that did not even look like mine. My breath came out in soft, uneven clouds, almost invisible in the wind, and every inhale felt like it scraped my lungs. Through the fogged glass window beside me, I could still see the warm yellow light of the dining room and my mom and my younger sister Morgan sitting at the table as if nothing had happened. They were eating the Christmas Eve dinner I had spent all afternoon preparing. I watched my mom lift another bite of ham and laugh at something Morgan said while the snow piled deeper on my coat and hair. They did not even look toward the door. I heard her voice, though carried faintly through the glass, the same sentence that had hit harder than the freezing air even before she slammed the door on me. She will come back inside when she learns her lesson. The words echoed inside my head, making everything feel heavier. My lips were numb, but I still tried to speak, tried to say, "Mom, please open the door," but only a faint, shaky exhale came out. My jaw felt stiff and my teeth could not stop chattering even though I barely had the strength to move them. A sharp gust of wind pushed more snow across my body, burying my legs, and I tried to push myself up onto my elbows, but my arms trembled and gave out instantly. My vision blurred for a moment, then cleared just enough for me to see my own breath slowing. It scared me in a distant, detached way. I had read about hypothermia before, but feeling it creeping into my body was something else entirely, something terrifying and strangely calm at the same time. I blinked and suddenly the world tilted and shifted into a flash of memory still sharp and bright. My mom standing in the doorway, her face twisted in anger, her hand gripping my arm hard enough to make me stumble. I had tried to explain, tried to tell her I did not break the glass, Morgan did, but she would not listen. Her shouting drowned everything out. "You always ruin everything, Emily." Then the shove. Then the cold. Then the sound of the door slamming with a force so loud it blended with the howl of the storm. I remembered hitting the porch step, my knee buckling. I remembered trying to stand just long enough to knock on the door. But when I pressed my hand against it, the porch light clicked off. She did not want anyone to see me. When the flash faded, I was back in the present, lying sideways now because at some point my body had slumped without my noticing. My eyelids felt heavy, my mind drifting somewhere between panic and surrender. The storm around me sounded strangely far away, like I was hearing it from underwater. My thoughts blurred into one question. Is this really happening? Maybe 10 minutes passed, or maybe 30, I could not tell. Time did not feel real anymore. My fingertips were stiff, my breathing shallow, and the snow that kept piling onto my jacket felt almost gentle, like a blanket tucking me in. I could not feel the pain in my hands or feet anymore, and that scared me more than the cold itself. Somewhere deep down, a small, stubborn part of me kept whispering, "Not like this. Emily, not here, not on this porch." I tried to crawl again, pressing my palm against the icy wood, but my arm shook helplessly, and I fell forward, my cheek hitting the porch with a dull, muted thud. The world pulsed in and out of focus. My mom and Morgan were still talking, still laughing, still living in that warm, bright room where I was no longer welcome. As my eyes drifted closed, I had one last clear thought that cut through everything. If anyone watching this has ever felt abandoned by the people who should have cared the most, comment, "I hear you," so I know I am not the only one who has lived through a moment like this. I was born in Spokane in 1991, and for the first few years of my life, things felt ordinary in the way childhood often does when you are too young to understand the cracks forming underneath. My dad was the calm one in the house, the person who made everything feel steady. I remember him lifting me onto his shoulders during the Lilac Festival parades or teaching me how to tie my shoes on the old beige carpet in the living room. Those memories feel warm even now. But everything changed when he passed away suddenly when I was 10 years old. Losing him was like losing the one barrier that had kept the storms in our house from spilling over. After that, my mom hardened into someone sharper, someone colder, someone who seemed to think tenderness was a weakness she could no longer afford. She never said she blamed me, but the way she looked at me sometimes made me feel like she believed life would have been easier if I were not there. When my younger sister Morgan was born 3 years earlier, she had already been the center of attention, but after our dad was gone, she became the untouchable one, the child my mom protected and praised endlessly. If Morgan breathed, it was brilliant. If I breathed, it was inconvenient. The contrast was impossible to ignore, even as a child. My mom praised Morgan for helping set the table, but scolded me for folding the napkins the wrong way. Morgan spilled juice on the couch and laughed about it while my mom rushed to clean it up, telling her accidents happen. I once accidentally knocked over a vase, and my mom did not speak to me for 2 full days. That was my first experience with silent treatment, the cold, isolating punishment that became her favorite method of control in the years that followed. I realized early that love in our home came with conditions. If I obeyed, if I stayed quiet, if I took on responsibilities no one credited me for, I would get a small temporary peace. But if I spoke up, if I questioned anything, if I made even the smallest mistake, my mom would withdraw affection and Morgan would watch with the satisfied expression of someone who knew she would never be treated that way. Those early years taught me how to survive by shrinking myself and pretending things did not hurt. I grew up carrying that habit like armor. When I turned 18, I packed my clothes into 2 duffel bags and left home for good, or so I thought. I went to community college, then worked my way into a steady job at an office in Seattle. It was the happiest I had ever been living in a small apartment that was truly mine, eating what I wanted, sleeping when I wanted, and breathing air that did not feel heavy. I rarely spoke to my mom during those years, except through brief holiday calls that always ended with me feeling guilty without knowing why. Morgan would occasionally send photos of new clothes or parties or vacations she took with Mom, and I would look at them wondering why her life seemed so easy while mine felt like a constant effort to build myself from scratch. Then, in early 2023, the company I worked for went through major layoffs. I was among the many employees let go. The job market tightened, and my savings began shrinking faster than I expected. Rent in Seattle was unforgiving. By August, I was out of realistic options, and when my mom suggested I come back to Spokane until I found something new, I hesitated but eventually accepted. I told myself it would be temporary, maybe a few months. Just enough time to stand up again financially. But I also knew deep down that returning to that house meant stepping back into a world I had carefully escaped. A world built on silent punishments, uneven love, and expectations that never belonged to me. I convinced myself I was strong enough now that things would be different. I was wrong. Moving back into my mom's house felt strange from the very first day, even though I tried to tell myself it was only temporary. Seattle had shaped me into someone independent, someone who made her own choices. But the moment I stepped through that familiar doorway in Spokane, it was as if the air thickened around me, reminding me of who I used to be. My mom greeted me with a stiff smile and a long look that seemed to assess whether I had earned the right to be there. She pointed at the guest room, which was really a storage space filled with old boxes, and said that was where I could stay until I figured things out. From the first week, she treated my return less like a daughter coming home and more like an employee moving into her workplace. Every morning before I even had the chance to drink coffee, she would call out from the hallway, reminding me to sweep the floors, start the laundry, or scrub the bathroom. It was never phrased as a request. It was always expected. She would leave lists on the counter with tasks written in sharp, hurried handwriting, and if anything was left undone, she would not ask why. She would simply glare at me long enough to make my stomach tighten with the old familiar fear of disappointing her. Morgan, who was 29 now but acted as if she were still the center of the universe, seemed to take joy in making sure I never felt comfortable. She would walk past me while I cleaned and drop comments like "you missed a spot" or "Seattle really did not teach you any skills, did it?" If I made dinner, she would find something to criticize: the seasoning, the plating, the way I chopped the vegetables. Sometimes she would whisper little digs under her breath, just loud enough for me to hear. "You always think you are better than us?" Or "maybe this is where you belong." I wanted to ignore her, but her words scraped at old wounds I had never fully healed. My mom did nothing to stop her. In fact, she often encouraged it. One evening, when I tried to explain that I was tired after spending the day job hunting online, my mom snapped back with one sentence that burned deep. "You being here is a debt to me, so do not start acting entitled." I stood there holding a stack of unfolded towels while her words settled like cold dust in the air. A debt. As if I had not spent years trying to build a life on my own. As if I had returned by choice instead of necessity. Every day felt like walking through a maze where the walls kept closing in. My mom monitored everything. When I woke up, what time I left the house, how long I was gone. She commented on my clothes, saying they were too plain, too wrinkled, too unprofessional. She asked why I spent so long in the shower. She questioned how many groceries I used when I cooked something. It felt like my autonomy was shrinking piece by piece. There was no privacy, no kindness, no space to breathe without being judged. Meals were tense. If I served food, my mom would taste it slowly as if searching for flaws. If Morgan cooked, she made sure to point out that hers tasted better than anything I ever made. At night, I would lie awake listening to the sound of the furnace clicking on and off while my mind replayed every small criticism, every sideways look, every moment that reminded me of the girl I used to be, the one who was never good enough no matter how hard she tried. The moment that cut the deepest happened during my second week back. I had bought a small scented candle as a gift for my mom, something simple to show appreciation for letting me stay. When I placed it on the counter, she picked it up, looked at it for barely 2 seconds, and said quietly, almost with disgust, "This looks cheap, Emily. You should not give me something like this. People will think I raised you badly." Then she set it aside as if it were trash. That tiny moment broke something inside me. It was such a small gift, yet somehow it revealed the entire dynamic of our relationship. Nothing I did would ever be good enough for her, and the more I tried, the more she would twist it into something shameful. I felt the old version of myself returning the girl who apologized for taking up space, and I hated that feeling. But no matter how much I tried to ignore it, I could sense something building a slow, steady pressure that eventually would have to break. By the time Christmas Eve arrived, I had already spent 4 months swallowing tension in that house, doing my best to stay useful, stay quiet, and stay out of trouble. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that things would ease up once I found a job and moved out. But December 24th, 2023 showed me just how fragile that hope truly was. My mom had invited a handful of neighbors and relatives for a Christmas Eve dinner, something she had not done in years. She said it was to lift the holiday spirit, but the way she said it made me feel more like I was being tested. The moment I woke up, she started listing tasks before I had even rubbed the sleep out of my eyes. Clean the kitchen, prepare the ham, set the table iron, the tablecloth arrange the seating. Morgan lounged on the couch, scrolling through her phone while I moved through the house like a worker on a strict deadline. Every time I passed by her, she smirked without looking up, and it made my stomach twist. By late afternoon, the house looked festive, candles lit wreath on the door, and a table filled with dishes I had cooked without a single helping hand. I tried to focus on the glow of the Christmas lights, reminding myself that when I lived in Seattle, I used to love this holiday. But being back in that house made the lights feel harsher, almost mocking. Guests began arriving just before 6. Neighbors from across the street, my aunt who only visited when invitations were involved, and 2 cousins who still treated Morgan like royalty. The dining room filled with chatter and small talk, and for a while, everything seemed normal. I stood at the kitchen counter carving the ham when I heard the sharp, distinctive sound of glass shattering. I turned just in time to see Morgan standing near the edge of the table, a broken wine glass at her feet, and an expression already shaped into the perfect performance of being offended. "Emily, what did you do?" Her voice was just loud enough for the room to quiet a little. I blinked, completely confused. I was not even near her, Before I could speak, she looked at our mom with wide, innocent eyes. I asked her to pass it, and she dropped it. I felt the heat rush to my face. That was not what happened at all. I opened my mouth to correct her, but my mom was already glaring at me like I had committed a crime in front of her guests. "This is why I cannot trust you with anything, Emily." Her tone was sharp and cutting, designed to humiliate. A couple of the guests shifted uncomfortably, pretending not to notice. I felt something inside me tighten, and before I could stop myself, I said quietly and clearly, "I did not break it. Morgan did." The room went still for a moment. My mom stared at me as if I had just slapped her, not because of the truth, but because I had dared to say it out loud in front of other people. Her voice dropped to a cold, controlled whisper, the kind she used when she wanted to remind me I had stepped out of line. "Do not you dare talk back to her on Christmas Eve." Morgan folded her arms and tilted her head with a little victorious smile that only I could see. It was the kind of smile that said she knew exactly how this would play out, and she had won before the argument even began. I tried to apologize, not because I had done anything wrong, but because I could feel the dinner unraveling. I said I did not mean to cause a scene, but my mom only grew more rigid, her anger simmering beneath the polite mask she wore for the guests. She served the food with a forced smile while throwing me a look so sharp it felt like a warning. Through the rest of dinner, the atmosphere hung thick with tension. The conversations were softer, more cautious. I could feel my mom's embarrassment simmering under her skin like a hot coal, and I knew that sooner or later it would burst. Every time I glanced at Morgan, she held that same smirk, that small, cruel curl at the corner of her mouth, as if she were waiting for the moment everything would finally snap. And deep down, I knew it would. By 7:30 that night, the snow had already thickened into long white sheets sweeping across the yard in relentless waves. The wind pressed against the walls with a force that made the windows shudder. The temperature kept dropping, and every weather alert on my phone warned people to stay indoors unless absolutely necessary. But inside my mom's house, the storm outside felt mild compared to the storm brewing in her eyes. Dinner had ended, but the tension had not. The guests made polite excuses to leave early, sensing something was wrong. When the last door closed behind them, my mom turned toward me with a look I had not seen since childhood, a look that always came right before the worst moments. She told me to follow her into the hallway, and I did, hoping she just wanted to talk. I wanted to explain again that I had not broken the glass, that Morgan had blamed me unfairly, and that I had only spoken up because the truth mattered. But the moment I tried to speak, she cut me off sharply as if my voice itself was an offense. "Do not explain. Do not justify. Just accept you embarrassed this family." I swallowed hard, trying to stay calm. I said quietly, "Mom, I did not do anything disrespectful. I just told the truth." Morgan walked into the hallway and stood behind her arms folded and chin lifted like an audience member waiting for the show to start. I could feel her satisfaction in the air. My mom took a step closer, her voice rising with every word. "You never take responsibility. You always make me look like a fool. And on tonight of all nights." I tried again to keep my voice steady, but the frustration that had been building over months finally cracked through. I said, "Mom, it was not my fault." Morgan dropped the glass. She saw it. I saw it. Everyone saw her acting like it was me. Why does the blame always fall on me no matter what? For a second, a sharp silence filled the space between us. Then, something in her expression snapped. Her face hardened into a cold, furious stare, and she hissed a sentence that hit me harder than the wind waiting outside. "You are not my daughter anymore." The house went silent. Even Morgan straightened a little as if she had not expected that level of rage. I stared at my mom, stunned, unable to process how quickly her anger had crossed a line she could never step back from. Before I could say anything, she grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my coat sleeve as she yanked me toward the front door. I stumbled, trying to keep my footing. The storm roared louder as she twisted the lock. I said, "Mom, wait, please, just talk to me," but she was far beyond hearing anything. The door flew open and a burst of icy wind exploded into the hallway, stinging my face and pulling at my hair. Snow swirled across the doorstep, carried by gusts strong enough to tilt me sideways. Without a moment of hesitation, she shoved me out into the cold. I slipped on the layer of ice that had formed on the porch, and my knee struck the wooden step, sending a sharp jolt up my leg. Before I even had time to steady myself, I heard it. The door slammed shut behind me with a crack so loud it echoed over the howling wind. It was a sound that would replay in my mind for months. That one brutal slam. I scrambled to my feet, brushing snow from my sleeves, trying to knock on the door, trying to explain again that this had gone too far. Through the small frosted window, I saw Morgan standing behind her arms crossed over her chest, her expression calm and distant. She watched me without blinking, as if she were observing something expected, something deserved. I knocked again and again, my breath coming out in panicked clouds, but there was no movement on the other side of the glass. Then the hallway light inside flickered. My mom reached up, and with one deliberate motion she flipped the switch. The porch went dark. The little bit of warmth from the house vanished both literally and in every other way that mattered. I stood there alone in the cold, the storm slamming against me with the same unforgiving force that my mom had used moments earlier. My legs gave out and I slipped backward, landing on the icy step. Snow whipped across my face and hair. The wind drowned out everything, even my own voice as I whispered, "Mom, please." But she was done. The door stayed locked, the lights stayed off, and the storm kept closing in as the cold began to take hold of my body. The first few minutes outside felt like stepping into another world, a world where the cold was not just a temperature, but a force that pushed against every inch of my body. I tried to keep myself upright, gripping the porch railing to steady my shaking legs, but the metal burned against my skin even through my glove. The wind kept throwing sharp flakes of snow into my face, and each one felt like a tiny needle striking my cheeks. I kept telling myself, "Stay awake, stay awake, stay awake," as if repeating the words would keep my mind from slipping into that hazy edge I could already feel creeping in. I tried to stand, but the layer of ice beneath my boots made my feet slip, and I fell forward, landing hard on my hands. The cold shot through my palms so fast it was almost like heat. I pushed myself up, but my arms buckled again, and I landed on my side, the snow cushioning the fall only for a moment before its freezing weight pressed into my clothes. My breath came out in broken gasps. Each inhale burned, each exhale felt too weak to matter. I stared at my hands and watched them tremble uncontrollably, the tips already losing color. I flexed my fingers trying to keep the blood moving, but they felt stiff like they belonged to someone else. I tried again to get up using the porch post as support, and this time I managed to stand long enough to take 2 shaky steps toward the door before slipping again and collapsing onto my knees. Snow blew across the porch in fast ribbons covering my boots, then my legs, then slowly working its way up to my waist. I tilted my head back and looked at the single dim porch light from the neighbor's house across the street. It flickered in and out behind the sheets of snow, and for a moment I thought about calling out for help, but my voice was barely a whisper. When I checked my phone, the screen was foggy from the cold, and my fingers fumbled over the buttons. I could not unlock it. My hands were too numb. The time on the lock screen burned into my mind. 8:26. I had been out there almost an hour. I told myself I could make it 1 more minute, 1 more breath, 1 more attempt to stand. I tried again to push myself up, but my legs felt heavy like they were sinking into the wood. My head started to feel oddly light, and my thoughts drifted into slow, unfocused loops. At one point, I closed my eyes just to stop the wind from burning them, and when I opened them again, the world did not look the same. Through the blur of snow, I saw a figure at the edge of the walkway, a familiar outline, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing the same old flannel jacket my dad used to wear on winter mornings. His face was soft the way I remembered it, and he looked at me with the same gentle concern he always had when I got hurt as a child. For a moment, warmth rushed through me so real it made my chest ache. "Dad." The word formed silently in my mind. He reached out a hand as if asking me to come with him, but when I blinked, the figure dissolved into nothing more than the swirling snow. The sudden emptiness hit me hard, and the world started tilting sideways. I tried to shake my head clear, but the effort made me dizzier. The wind picked up again, shoving more snow against my back and shoulders, pressing me deeper into the cold. My limbs were losing feeling one by one, like lights going out in a house. My breathing slowed into shallow, faint puffs, and for the first time, I wondered if I would ever stand up again, or if the storm would claim me right there on that porch. At 9:42 that night, when the storm was at its worst, a sound I barely registered cut through the wind, the creak of a trash bin being dragged across pavement. I could not lift my head fully, but I saw a shape moving near the edge of the driveway, a dark silhouette blurred by the snow. It was Mr. Daniel Hayes, my 61-year-old neighbor who lived 2 houses down. He always took his trash out late. Something I used to find odd when I lived here as a kid, but that small habit ended up saving my life. He paused mid-step, his posture stiffening as he stared toward my mom's porch. At first, he squinted like he was not sure what he was seeing. Then he took 2 hurried steps forward, and I heard his voice rise with alarm. "Emily!" His footsteps crunched through the snow as he rushed over, bending down beside me. His gloved hand brushed snow from my hair and jacket, and I heard him suck in a shocked breath. "Honey, what on earth happened? Can you hear me?" I tried to speak, but my voice was trapped somewhere deep in my chest. I forced out a faint, broken whisper. Mom locked me out. The words sounded thin, even to me, barely audible under the wind. He leaned closer, his face pale with disbelief, and shouted toward his house, "Mary, call 911 now!" Within seconds, his wife opened their door, and when she saw him kneeling beside me, she covered her mouth before rushing inside to grab her phone. The cold was swallowing the edges of my vision. Everything felt slow and heavy, like my body was drifting away from itself. Mr. Hayes kept talking, trying to keep me awake, asking questions I could not answer. He removed his own coat and placed it over me, even though the wind kept trying to rip it away. "Stay with me, Emily. Stay with me," he kept saying, his voice firm but shaking. The sirens arrived faster than I expected. Only 6 minutes later, though it felt like an hour. The flashing red lights cut through the swirling white of the storm as the EMTs rushed toward us carrying equipment. One of them lifted my chin, gently checking my eyes, while another placed a warming blanket over me. They spoke quickly to each other, but I caught one sentence clearly. "Core temp is 92. Dangerous hypothermia." They placed an oxygen tube under my nose and lifted me carefully onto a stretcher. As they carried me toward the ambulance, I saw Mr. Hayes standing in the storm, watching with worry etched into every line of his face. It was the last clear image I had before the doors closed and the world faded into the dim hum of the rescue vehicle. The lights inside Sacred Heart Medical Center felt almost blinding after the dark, frozen world outside. As the EMTs pushed the stretcher through the sliding doors, the sudden rush of warm air hit my skin like pins, waking nerves that had gone numb. The sounds around me blended into a blur of beeping monitors, quick footsteps, and voices calling instructions. I drifted in and out of awareness, catching only fragments. Hypothermia level 2, peripheral nerve response weak, possible head trauma. They moved me into a treatment room, and a doctor in a navy blue jacket leaned over me, shining a small light into my eyes. "Can you hear me, Emily?" Blink twice. I managed one slow blink, then another. My jaw could not form words properly, but at least I was conscious enough to follow his instructions. He checked my hands, pressing along my fingers and wrists, and noted the delayed reaction. Then he gently touched the back of my head, and I flinched at the tenderness there. "It feels swollen," he said to the nurse, "probably from a fall. We will scan her to be sure." A warm air device was placed over my body, blowing steady heat against my skin, while a nurse wrapped heating packs near my chest and under my arms. The sensation was both comforting and painful as the blood began moving again. After several minutes, the doctor returned holding a chart, his expression serious but steady. "Emily, your core temperature was dangerously low when you arrived. You are experiencing hypothermia level 2, which can affect your heart, your coordination, and your ability to think clearly. You also have reduced nerve response in your hands and feet. That will likely improve with time. The bump on your head appears consistent with a fall. We will keep you under observation until your temperature stabilizes." His tone shifted slightly, becoming more careful. "I need to ask you something important. How long were you outside?" I swallowed, feeling the dryness in my throat. "I think 2 hours. Maybe more." He wrote something down on the chart. And how did you end up outside? The room went quiet. The nurse paused what she was doing, waiting for my answer. Even the heating device seemed to hum softer. I could have lied. I could have said I slipped. I could have said nothing. But the image of my mom closing the porch light on me replayed in my mind, and the truth forced its way out. My mom locked me out. His pen stopped moving. He looked at me closely, as if making sure he had heard correctly. Your mother locked you out in this weather. I nodded. The nurse exhaled slowly, shaking her head. The doctor lifted the chart again, writing a series of notes with deliberate care. Washington state law requires us to notify authorities when there is suspicion of domestic endangerment, he said gently. A police officer will need to speak with you tonight. It is not optional. I felt a strange mix of fear and relief settle in my chest. Fear because saying the truth out loud made everything real. Relief because this time someone finally believed me without question. The doctor placed a reassuring hand on the side of the bed. You are safe now, Emily. We will take care of the medical part. The rest will be handled. And for the first time that night, I felt the smallest spark of warmth that had nothing to do with the heating blankets covering my body. About an hour after the doctor finished explaining my condition, a soft knock sounded at the door of my ER room. A nurse stepped inside and said softly, Emily, the officers from Spokane Police Department are here to speak with you. Are you feeling well enough? I nodded, even though my stomach tightened. 2 officers entered the room, one older with silver hair at his temples, and one younger who carried a small tablet for taking statements. They introduced themselves, calmly speaking with the kind of steady tone meant to assure someone they were not in trouble. The older officer pulled a chair beside the bed while the younger stood near the foot, tapping gently on his screen. Emily, we understand you were found outside during the storm, he began. We just need to ask a few questions to understand what happened. Can you tell us how you ended up on the porch? My throat felt tight again, but I forced myself to answer. My mom locked me out. His brows lifted slightly, but he did not interrupt. He simply wrote the words down slowly. I tried to keep the explanation simple, telling them that I had stepped outside after an argument and the door shut behind me. I left out Morgan and I left out the shove, hoping that maybe simplifying things would make it less humiliating to repeat. But the younger officer watched me carefully, his tone gentle but direct when he asked, Emily, did you walk outside on your own, or were you pushed? I hesitated. The truth pressed at the back of my mind, and the memory of the doorway crash flickered again. The wind, the slam, the sting of hitting the step. My instinct was to protect the family that had never protected me, but lying now felt pointless. I looked down at my bandaged hand, then back up at the officer. I was pushed. Silence settled for a few seconds, the heavy kind that absorbs every small breath in the room. The older officer spoke next, his voice softer. Was it your mother who pushed you? I nodded once. He wrote that down too. They continued with a few more questions about how long I had been outside, whether I had tried to get back in, and whether there had been previous issues at home. I answered truthfully but carefully, still avoiding details that might escalate things more than necessary. When the interview ended, the younger officer reviewed the notes, then looked at me with quiet certainty. This will be filed as a domestic endangerment case. Given the weather conditions and your injuries, it meets the criteria. We will also need statements from your neighbors and your medical team. The words domestic endangerment hung in the air heavier than I expected. Part of me felt exposed, but another part finally felt seen. As the officers thanked me for my time and stepped out of the room, I realized something important. The truth was no longer something I carried alone. The morning after the police interview, I woke to the sound of soft footsteps and quiet voices outside my ER curtain. My temperature had risen enough for the nurses to remove the warming packs, but my body still felt heavy and sore, as if the cold had settled deep inside my bones. A few minutes later, the curtain pulled back, and the same 2 officers from the night before stepped inside. Their expressions were more serious now, but not unkind. Emily, one of the officers said, we have additional information about what happened last night. My pulse quickened. I pushed myself slightly upright, trying to brace for whatever was coming. The officer glanced at his tablet before continuing. Your neighbor, Mr. Hayes, provided footage from his Ring camera. It captured part of the incident on your mother's porch. My chest tightened. I had not realized his camera reached that far. The officer moved closer and turned the screen for me to see. The video was grainy from the snow, but the shapes were unmistakable. Me in the doorway. My mom pushing me outward. My body stumbling and falling onto the porch, and then the door shutting hard enough to shake the frame. Another angle showed how long I lay there unmoving while snow piled around me. Seeing it from the outside felt surreal, as if I were watching a stranger collapse, not myself. The officer paused, giving me time to absorb it. The footage is time-stamped. It shows the severity of the situation very clearly. Your mother closed the door and turned the porch light off. This supports everything you stated last night. My throat grew tight with a mix of shame relief and something heavier, a confirmation that this time the truth was visible, not just a memory in my head. The officers said they had already collected statements from Mr. Hayes and his wife, both confirming they found me unresponsive and covered in snow. The doctor had also signed a formal medical report diagnosing dangerous hypothermia and minor head trauma consistent with falling onto a hard surface. The words in the report were clinical but powerful. They carried weight, enough weight to be used legally. The officer explained that the combination of the video evidence and the medical documentation supported charges of reckless endangerment, which under Washington law could not be ignored. It was not just a family argument anymore. It was a case. As if to prove just how far my mom and Morgan were willing to go, a nurse entered the room holding a phone. She whispered to me that someone online had posted about me and that the police might want to see it. I frowned, confused, until the younger officer pulled up a screenshot of a social media story. It was Morgan's. The text read, "Emily stormed out during dinner and refused to come back inside. She does this to herself." The post was filled with emojis and light-hearted tone as if the situation were some dramatic prank and not something life-threatening. But the officer had a second screenshot. Someone had already captured the post before Morgan deleted it. In the image, the timestamp matched the period I was lying unconscious. The officer raised an eyebrow. This contradicts the video evidence and appears to be an attempt to mislead. It does not look good for her. I stared at the screenshot, feeling a strange cold spread through me. Not the physical cold from last night, but the kind that comes from finally seeing the truth, without filters, without excuses, without cushioning. They were not just angry. They were willing to rewrite reality to protect themselves, and now the evidence was stronger than their lies. By early afternoon, the ER had settled into a quiet rhythm, broken only by the soft beeping of monitors and the hushed conversations of nurses changing shifts. I had finally begun to feel warmth return to my hands when the officer stepped back into my room with an update. Their expressions told me before they even spoke. "We contacted your mother," the older officer said. "We asked her to come to the hospital to give her statement. She agreed." My stomach tightened. I was not sure whether it was fear-shame or something heavier, a mix of all the years that had led to this one moment. The officer continued, "We want her statement to be taken here in the presence of medical staff since they treated you. It ensures clarity. It ensures transparency." I breathed slowly, trying to prepare myself. I had told the truth in the ER. I had told the truth to the police. But speaking it in front of my mom, in front of witnesses, was something else entirely. 15 minutes later, a nurse appeared at my curtain. "Emily, they are bringing your mother to the waiting area. Would you like to be present?" I nodded, even though my heart pounded against my ribs. They wheeled my bed into the hallway and then into the small waiting area just outside the treatment rooms. The space felt brighter somehow, too open, too exposed. My mom stood near the chairs, her purse clutched tightly in her hands. Morgan lingered behind her, shifting anxiously. The moment my mom saw me, her expression flickered between surprise and annoyance, as if she had not expected the officers to position us this way. The younger officer began calmly. "Mrs. Carter, thank you for coming. We are reviewing the incident from last night. We have medical and video documentation. We need accurate statements from all involved." My mom blinked quickly, recovering her composure. "I do not know what Emily told you," she said, "but she left the house on her own. She has always been dramatic." A soft gasp came from someone nearby. I turned and saw Mr. and Mrs. Hayes standing by the doorway. They had returned to the hospital to check on me, and the officers must have asked them to wait. Their presence mattered more than my mom realized. The doctor entered next, holding my chart. His voice carried a calm authority that made everyone instinctively pause. "Mrs. Carter, I treated your daughter last night. Her core temperature was 92 degrees, which is a medical emergency. Her injuries are consistent with being outside for an extended period and with falling onto a hard surface." He flipped a page. She was found unresponsive. Had she remained outside longer, the results could have been fatal. My mom swallowed her jaw, tightening. I told them she walked out. She chose to sit outside. I would never put her out in the cold. The doctor did not raise his voice, but the firmness in it felt like a door closing. "The Ring camera footage provided by your neighbors shows otherwise." The waiting room fell silent. My mom's face went pale, and Morgan's eyes darted quickly between everyone as if searching for an escape from the truth. The older officer stepped forward. "Mrs. Carter, the footage shows you pushing Emily out onto the porch and closing the door. It also shows you turning off the porch light. The evidence is clear." Gasps rippled through the room. Mrs. Hayes shook her head slowly, disbelief and disappointment etched across her face. My mom finally looked at me. Really looked at me, but there was no apology in her eyes, only shock that her version of the story had unraveled. For years, she had controlled the narrative behind closed doors, but this time the doors were open and people were watching. I took a breath, steadying myself. The truth came out quieter than I expected, but strong enough to carry. "I did not walk out. You pushed me. You locked the door. You left me there." The officers documented her reaction, the doctor stood firm, and my neighbors remained witnesses to everything unfolding. It was public. It was undeniable. And for the first time in my life, the truth did not disappear into silence. It stood out in full view, and she could not hide from it. The moment the truth was spoken aloud, the tension in the room snapped like a wire pulled too tight. My mom's face hardened, and she straightened her shoulders as if preparing for battle. She pointed at me with a shaking hand and said loudly, "She is making this up. She has always exaggerated everything. This is just another story she created to make herself look like a victim." Her voice rose higher with each word, as though volume alone could erase everything the officers had just laid out. Morgan jumped in immediately, her voice sharp and defensive. "Emily has not been stable for months. She stressed herself out in Seattle, and now she is blaming us for what she did to herself. She stormed outside. We tried to help her." People nearby exchanged looks of disbelief. Even in that moment, even with the evidence literally recorded, they still chose to twist reality. My mom continued, "This is embarrassing. I cannot believe you are taking her side." She looked at the officers as if waiting for them to correct themselves, but the younger officer kept his expression steady. "Mrs. Carter, the video footage contradicts what you are saying. The medical findings also confirm prolonged exposure, inconsistent with voluntarily staying outside. Your daughter's injuries align with being pushed and being left in freezing temperatures." My mom shook her head rapidly, refusing to accept it. "That camera angle must be wrong. You cannot see everything clearly." She turned toward Mr. and Mrs. Hayes as if hoping to sway them. "Daniel, you know how emotional she gets. Tell them." But Mr. Hayes simply crossed his arms and said, "I saw her in the snow. She did not walk out there by choice." My mom's eyes flashed with panic for a brief second before she regained her defensive posture. "This is ridiculous. She embarrassed us in front of guests last night. She left because she wanted attention." The older officer stepped forward, holding a small clipboard. "Mrs. Carter, we need you to come with us to answer more questions, separately. Morgan, we will also need you to remain outside the area during your mother's statement." Both of them froze. They were not used to losing control of the narrative. They were not used to people questioning their version of events. My mom stammered, "You cannot take me away. I have nothing to hide." But the officers were professional, calm, and firm, guiding her toward a private interview room. Morgan stood in the hallway, looking pale and furious, gripping her phone like she wanted to smash it. For years, their words ruled the household, shaping what was true and what was not. But here in this hospital with cameras, reports, witnesses, and law enforcement, their lies finally hit a wall they could not bend or break. And for the first time, they had to face it without the safety of closed doors. The day after the confrontation at the hospital, the social worker assigned to my case introduced herself and explained that because my situation fell under domestic endangerment, I qualified for legal assistance through Spokane's DV support program. I had never worked with an attorney before, and the idea felt intimidating, but when my assigned lawyer, Ms. Caroline Whitfield, walked into the small consultation room, her calm, steady presence immediately eased the knot in my chest. She was in her mid-40s, sharp-eyed, organized, and surprisingly warm. "Emily," she said, sitting across from me with a folder already filled with documents, "I've reviewed the preliminary reports from the hospital and the officers. There is strong evidence in your favor. We're going to build this case carefully, and we're going to make sure you're protected." Hearing those words made something inside me unclench. For the first time, I did not feel like I was walking into a fight alone. She began by reviewing every detail of the medical records the hospital provided: the hypothermia diagnosis, the core temperature reading, the swelling on the back of my head, the loss of peripheral nerve response, and the timeline recorded by EMT. Each piece of information would become part of the official report supporting my statement. "This will be crucial," she said while highlighting sections. "Medical documentation is very difficult to dispute." Next, she called in Mr. and Mrs. Hayes so she could hear their eyewitness accounts directly. They sat beside me in the consultation room, and as they described finding me under the snow, their voices were steady but emotional. Mr. Hayes emphasized the exact time he saw me on the porch and the length of time I appeared unresponsive. Mrs. Hayes added her own observations of my condition when EMT arrived. "You saved her life," Ms. Whitfield told them sincerely. Their presence felt like a fortress behind me, something solid and reliable in the middle of so much uncertainty. Then came the evidence from the Ring camera. Ms. Whitfield studied each frame carefully as the officers transferred the footage to an official evidence file. The recordings were clear enough to show the movement of the door, the shove, and the porch light turning off. She murmured, "This alone changes the entire trajectory of the case." Meanwhile, the police had begun collecting digital evidence from my sister. Because Morgan had posted publicly that I had walked out voluntarily, and because the timestamp contradicted the reality, the investigators requested access to her phone to determine whether the posts were part of an attempt to influence or mislead the situation. Morgan resisted at first, but the officers insisted, citing the misleading statement and the timing. Ms. Whitfield noted that as well. "If she tried to distort the events, it supports your credibility, not theirs." By the end of the afternoon, our legal file had grown thick: witness statements, medical records, screenshots of Morgan's deleted story, the Ring footage, and the police interview transcript. Ms. Whitfield placed everything into an organized binder and slid it toward me. "Emily," she said, meeting my eyes, "your family may try to fight this, but the facts are on your side. The law is on your side. This case is strong, and we are going to move forward." For the first time since the night of the storm, I felt something settle quietly inside me, a sense of direction, of structure, of justice beginning to take shape. The courthouse in downtown Spokane always looked imposing from the outside, with its pale stone walls and tall windows that seemed to watch everyone who entered. On the morning of the first hearing, I walked in with my attorney beside me, trying to steady my breathing. My palms felt damp, my legs unsteady, but Ms. Whitfield's calm presence grounded me. "Emily, remember," she whispered as we approached the courtroom, "you are not the one on trial. You're the one who survived." Inside the room was cold and quiet, the kind of quiet that felt heavy rather than peaceful. The judge sat high at the bench, reviewing documents, the clerk shuffled papers, and the prosecutor arranged a stack of folders on their table. My mother sat across the room with her own attorney. She looked smaller than I remembered, but not fragile, just tense, as if trying to hold herself together. Morgan sat behind her, arms folded tightly, eyes darting around as though searching for a version of the truth she might still control. When the judge called the case, the prosecutor stood and began outlining the charges. The count is reckless endangerment in the first degree, tied to events occurring on December 24, 2023. The details were clinical, factual, delivered without emotion. Yet they cut through the room like sharp glass. Leaving her daughter outdoors during severe winter conditions with evidence indicating she was pushed and subsequently locked out, creating a substantial risk of injury or death. I did not realize I was holding my breath until my chest ached. The prosecutor presented the first exhibit, the Ring camera footage. The courtroom dimmed slightly as the monitor lit up and the video played. Even though I had seen it before, watching myself stumble out the door, watching my mother's arm push forward, watching the slam and the porch light flicker off made every muscle in my body tense. A murmur rippled through the small audience seats, a mixture of shock and disbelief. Next came the timestamp overlay, matched with the weather records for that night, confirming the temperature and wind conditions. After that, the ER report was projected summarizing my core body temperature, the documented hypothermia level, the swelling on the back of my head, and the doctor's notes stating that continued exposure could have resulted in fatal consequences. The prosecutor delivered each piece with calm precision. Then it was my mother's turn to speak. Her attorney placed a comforting hand on her back as she stood. She dabbed her eyes with a tissue and began softly, "I didn't mean to hurt her. She was upset. She rushed outside and I panicked. I made a mistake, but I never intended any harm." Her voice cracked at all the carefully chosen moments, but nothing in her statement acknowledged the truth caught on camera. The prosecutor remained composed. "Intent is not the only standard that matters," they said. "Reckless disregard for safety is enough. Your actions placed her in life-threatening danger." My mother looked toward me, then her eyes wide, pleading as if she wanted me to save her from the consequences she had created. But instead of guilt, I felt something clearer, a recognition that this was not my burden anymore. The judge adjourned for the day, noting that testimony and cross-examination would resume tomorrow. As people rose from their seats, the weight of everything settled in. Day one was over. The truth was no longer hidden, and the case had truly begun. When I walked back into the courtroom the next morning, the air felt heavier, as if everyone could sense that the end of the case was approaching. The judge entered with the same firm posture as before, but this time there was a sharper focus in his expression. He reviewed his notes quietly while the room settled into uneasy silence. My mother sat rigid in her seat, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white. Morgan hovered behind her, restless, tapping her heel against the floor. The judge began by summarizing the evidence. The ring footage, the timestamp alignment, the ER findings, the weather conditions, the witness statements, the misleading social media post, and the inconsistencies in my mother's testimony. Each point landed with a steady finality building towards something none of us could escape. Then he looked directly at my mother. His voice was clear, controlled, and without hesitation. "Mrs. Carter, your actions on the night of December 24th could have killed your daughter. Leaving someone outside in freezing temperatures after physically forcing them out and closing the door demonstrates a level of disregard for human safety that this court cannot overlook." My mother's shoulders tightened. Morgan's eyes widened as if she had not expected the judge to be so blunt. The judge continued. "The defense argues that it was an emotional mistake, but the evidence contradicts that narrative. The shutting off of the porch light, the locked door, and the duration of exposure reflect a reckless decision with life-threatening consequences." A murmur spread through the courtroom. I felt my breath catch as the judge lifted the final document. For the charge of reckless endangerment in the first degree, this court finds the defendant guilty. My mother's head dropped, and for a moment she looked stunned, as if the word guilty had struck her physically. The judge listed the sentencing terms with steady, unwavering clarity. 18 months supervised probation, 120 hours of community service, a 1-year no-contact order with the victim. Then he turned to Morgan. Her false statement, the misleading post, and her attempt to interfere with the investigation were also addressed. Morgan Carter is fined for providing false information and harassment toward the victim during an active investigation. Morgan's mouth fell open, her confidence evaporating in an instant. The judge closed the session with a firm conclusion. This court expects accountability. Actions have consequences, and today those consequences are being enforced. As gavel struck wood, a ripple of finality filled the room. My mother sat frozen, Morgan speechless, and for the first time in my life, I felt a deep, quiet certainty that justice had finally found its way to me. 3 months after the verdict, when life had finally begun to feel steady again, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but something made me open the message. The moment I saw the name attached to it, a cold heaviness settled in my chest. It was my mother. Her text was brief, typed as if nothing had ever happened between us. Emily, I need your help. I'm having a hard time financially. You're doing better now. You should help your family. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, stunned not by the request itself, but by the audacity behind it. After everything that had been exposed in court, after months of refusing accountability after treating me like I was disposable, she still believed she could reach for me the moment she wanted something. There was no apology in her message, no acknowledgement of what she'd done, no recognition that her actions had nearly ended my life. To her, the past was something she could step over as long as she needed something on the other side. I sat with the phone in my hand, letting the quiet of my new apartment wrap around me. For years, I would have responded with guilt or fear or some desperate need to keep the peace. Not anymore. Not after what I had survived. My reply was only one sentence, but it held every boundary I had been too scared to draw before. Mom, you shut me out. And now, I'm closing my door. I hit send. No shaking hands, no second guessing, no lingering guilt. Just clarity. A minute later, before she could reply with excuses or anger or manipulation, I blocked her number, and for the first time in my life, the silence that followed felt like freedom instead of punishment. After cutting contact with my mother, the first thing I did was move into a small studio apartment in Spokane Valley. It wasn't much, just a single room with warm, light, creaky floors and a tiny balcony overlooking the parking lot. But to me, it felt like a sanctuary. I could breathe in it. I could think in it. For the first time in years, every inch of the space belonged to me. I bought a cheap second-hand couch, a small dining table, and one potted plant that I kept on the windowsill. Watching it survive the winter felt strangely symbolic, like proof that I could survive too. My body, though, still carried the memory of the cold. My hands tingled randomly throughout the day, and sometimes my legs felt weak when I walked for too long. My doctor recommended physical therapy, so twice a week I went to a clinic nearby where a therapist named Jenna patiently worked with me. She helped me rebuild strength in my fingertips, improve circulation in my feet, and regain balance I didn't even realize I had lost. Each session was slow, sometimes frustrating, but little milestones, like being able to grip a mug steadily again, felt like personal victories. Emotionally, the recovery was different, harder, quieter. There were nights when the storm replayed itself in my mind, when the silence of my mother's house crept back and made my chest tighten. But instead of burying those moments, I started writing them down. I filled a notebook with memories, realizations, and truths I had been too afraid to face. Naming the pain helped remove its power. Slowly, I rebuilt pieces of myself that had been dimmed for years. 2 months after the verdict, I applied for a part-time job at Spokane Community College's library. When they offered me the position, I cried in the parking lot before I even walked in. The job was simple, checking out books, organizing shelves, helping students find resources, but it grounded me. The quiet hum of the library, the smell of old pages, the soft murmur of students studying it all felt healing in ways I hadn't expected. The small paychecks weren't much, but earning them on my own felt like reclaiming something important. Independence, stability, worth. Every day I locked the library door at closing time. I felt myself growing a little stronger, a little surer, a little more whole. For the first time in my adult life, I was building a future that wasn't shaped by fear or obligation. It was shaped by me. When spring finally arrived in Spokane and the last patches of winter snow melted into thin gray slush along the sidewalks, I felt a quiet pull inside me. Not fear, not nostalgia, just a sense that something unfinished needed its final chapter. So, one Saturday afternoon, I drove back to the neighborhood where everything had happened. As I turned onto the familiar street, memories flickered like brief shadows, childhood bike rides, quiet summers, tense winters. But none of them weighed on me the way they used to. When I parked in front of the old house, the air felt still as if it had been waiting for me. I walked up the same steps where I had nearly frozen months ago. The porch looked different in the sunlight, less threatening, almost ordinary, but the wood still held the faint outline of that night in my mind. I stood there for a long moment, letting the warm breeze brush against my face where the icy wind once clawed at my skin. Then I looked at the front door. The door that had slammed shut on me not just physically but emotionally for years. The barrier that had told me I wasn't wanted, that my voice didn't matter, that my pain was invisible. But now I was standing in front of it, not as the daughter who once begged for acceptance, but as the woman who had survived it. I exhaled slowly and whispered softly enough that only I could hear it. "You didn't break me." The words didn't come from anger. They came from clarity, from closure, from the understanding that everything I'd built since leaving my job, my apartment, my boundaries, my peace was proof that I had walked away stronger, not shattered. I didn't knock. I didn't wait. I didn't look back to see if anyone peered through the curtains. I simply turned, walked down the steps, and headed toward my car. There was no heaviness in my chest this time. No guilt tugging at my ribs. No echo of the old fear. Just a clean, deep silence, the kind that comes when you finally leave something behind for good. As I reached the car door, the sun warmed my shoulders, and for the first time the world felt wide open. My story didn't end on that porch. It began after I walked away. If you've ever lived through family toxicity or survived something that tried to break you, share your city in the comments. I want to know how far this story reaches and remind you that you're not alone.